After the 16-bit intensity of A Link to the Past, it's doubtful many players would care much about another 8-bit Zelda game. This is a quote from an A Link to the Past strategy guide that I owned as a child, and it perfectly encapsulates the unenviable position that was handed to the 4th Zelda game. How do you follow up such an extraordinary and groundbreaking title as A Link to the Past on dramatically inferior hardware? These were the difficult parameters surrounding the development of The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. But not to be deterred, most of the original team behind A Link to the Past returned to try their hand at the first portable Zelda game. And if anyone can make a remarkable and memorable game with such constricting limitations, it is definitely these guys. So how did they do it? Well, that's what I'm here to discuss, my friends, in part 4 of my 15-part Legend of Zelda retrospective, where I will take a detailed look at how Link's Awakening furthered the evolution of the series, how it carves its own identity against its graphically superior cousins, and how it overcame its vast limitations to stand the test of time. Takashi Tezuka and the rest of his team didn't seem too concerned with the mountainous hurdles they were faced with in developing Link's Awakening. They knew how to play to the strengths of the hardware and create a game that doesn't aspire to outdo the previous one, but complement it. Shrink down the scope of A Link to the Past to create a more intimate and personal sort of affair, and establish elements that are nowhere present in that game. And this philosophy radiates from every corner of Link's Awakening. Many firsts for the series are established straight out the gate. It begins with backstory like always, only instead of text, we get the series' first animated cutscene. This cutscene is the inauguration of Link as he is portrayed in the artwork, the first time we get an in-game glimpse of what he looks like. He's the same Link from the last game. After defeating Ganon, he sets off on a voyage to train his skills, but is caught in a lightning storm and marooned on the uncharted Koholint Island. Koholint is not Hyrule, and as such there was no Zelda, no Ganon, and no Triforce to be found anywhere, making Link's Awakening the first bona fide side story. Now, with all the emphasis I've put so far in this series on plot and the ongoing mythos of Hyrule, we are now going to witness how a Zelda game can fare stripped of these elements. Link is found washed ashore by Marin, a young girl who takes him to her home in Mabe Village and cares for him. Link awakes delirious, believing her to be Zelda, and heads off to the beach to see if any of his items had washed ashore with him. And this is the extent of the context we're given as Link's Awakening begins. There is clearly a lot less grandeur than the previous games. There's no big threat to stop, no big quest to undertake, just walk outside and find out what's going on. Leave the house and we find ourselves in Mabe Village, marking the first time a Zelda game begins in a town. This is important not just because it establishes a tradition that would be followed by most of the upcoming games, but because it establishes Mabe Village as a sort of home, a safe haven if you will, that contributes to the overall intimacy of the game. Walking around Mabe and talking to the villagers will bring to light what is far and away the most important aspect of Link's Awakening: its tone. Tone is not something that is necessarily new to the series. The first game was adventurous, the second game was tense, and the third game was epic. But the tone of these three is much more subdued. They kind of blend together and feel similar, and they don't elicit much feeling besides tension and grandiosity. Link's Awakening flips the script in that regard. This game feels unique. It is whimsical, it is eccentric, it is funny, it is intimate, and it is mysterious. All 5 of these are brand new for this series and could very well have been spread out over many games. But Link's Awakening, in its 8-bit handheld confinements, is all of them at once, and it establishes what I believe to be Link's Awakening's prominent defining attribute: personality. When you think back onto a Zelda game, there's generally 1 or 2 things that pop out about it. The first game is free-spirited and cryptic. The second game is side-scrolling and hard as shit. A Link to the Past is the birth of the series formula as we know it today, and Link's Awakening will always and forever be known as the one with heart. The game is funny at every turn. Kids in the village explain how to save and then say they have no idea what they're talking about. A guy casually brings up that he'll be lost in the hills later, and the game itself pokes fun at you, the player. You got a bomb! Way to go! Tezuka said it felt like they were making a parody of Zelda, but in an endearing way, more Cabin in the Woods than Scary Movie. The characters that inhabit Koholint are unlike any we've seen so far. Not only are they eccentric and firmly rooted in non-reality, they're kind of shifty. You don't know if you can quite trust anyone on Koholint, least of all this owl that pops up everywhere. After Link finds his sword on the beach, the owl swoops in and says he can't leave the island unless he wakes the windfish. What does that mean? Then he tells Link to follow him to the mysterious forest. Why? Why should I listen to you? The owl eventually grows on you, but he avoids saying who he is or why he's helping you, instead popping in periodically to say something cryptic and then flying off. But you can't help but listen to him because he's the only one who seems to know anything important. And the story of Link's Awakening revolves around just trying to figure out what the hell's going on. The general idea from the start is that Link needs to wake the so-called windfish to leave Koholint Island. But it gets more and more intriguing and mysterious as it goes on. The owl says the windfish is getting restless and monsters are trying to take over the island. An ancient plaque reveals that Koholint is nothing but a dream of the windfish, to which the owl says that's just a rumor. But bosses all talk to you, calling you outsider, telling you don't know what you're doing, and that if you wake the windfish, that Koholint will vanish, including all of the people that you've come to know along the way. And if you hadn't shown up, none of this would have had to happen. That's pretty dark if you think about it. Is this a quest I even want to finish? Is escaping the island worth all of these people's lives? It's not as simple as yes, because they're all a dream anyway. The anchor in this story is Marin, who is, as I alluded to in the last episode, the first real tangible character in the series' history. Marin is unlike anyone else on Koholint, who all seem pretty indifferent to the windfish and the whole isolated island thing. She desires to leave the island, even going so far as to try and wake the windfish herself, not knowing what it would entail. She's enamored with Link because as an outsider, he inspires hope in her. And she's a really lovable character throughout, spending her days serenely singing a melody of her own composing, the Ballad of the Windfish. Sometimes I like to make Link sing along with her. Eventually in the story, Marin will follow Link to the desert to sing for a sleeping walrus, but if you want, you can just walk around with her and do a bunch of things. She'll chastise you for attacking chickens but secretly enjoys it. She messes with the proprietor of the trendy game by picking him up with the crane. She makes fun of you for digging, she lands on your head if you fall down a well, and there's a really sweet scene of her and Link sitting on the beach as she talks about her dreams. Marin is the character that is on your mind as you complete your journey of waking the windfish, and watching her vanish is heartbreaking. But during the ending, Link looks to the sky after Koholint disappears and sees an image of her spirit in the form of a seagull, indicating that the windfish had listened to her wish of flying away from the island. Marin completely exemplifies the tremendous impact that an interesting character can have on a story. And going back to A Link to the Past after playing this game, despite the superior processing power and the bigger scope, it's shockingly noticeable how much an improvement Link's Awakening is in this regard. It goes to show that not every game needs to be a big ol' epic, and fully answers my original question of how could a Zelda game fare without Zelda and Ganon and Hyrule. It fares beautifully. And it's not just the writing and the story that makes Link's Awakening an incredible game. In nearly every area, it makes up for its hardware limitations in unbelievable ways. The sound quality is quite bad, music often drowned out by sound effects as they're probably on the same track layer or whatever, but the soundtrack is gigantic and the tunes are absolutely wonderful. The best song is of course Ballad of the Windfish, but not far behind is Tall Tall Heights. Hardware limitations of course hold back the dungeons from having unique visual themes, but once again this shortcoming is alleviated in 3 different ways. The least important of which is that each dungeon is shaped like what it's named after, like a bottle for Bottle Grotto and a key for Key Cavern. It's nothing more than a charming sort of thing to notice, but it's pretty neat nonetheless. But more importantly, for the very first time in the series, every single dungeon gets its own unique tune. And these songs are great for establishing atmosphere in ways that the graphics aren't capable of. The Eagle's Tower is puzzling, the Face Shrine is confusing, Turtle Rock is unsettling. It's a tremendous step forward for the series, and it sets a precedent for future Zelda games to have unique dungeon themes. The third and most important way in which the dungeons are brought to life is through their design. Every single dungeon feels different from one another, even more different than the aesthetically diverse dungeons of the previous game. The major overhaul to level design is that the dungeon item now features a prominent role in solving it. You see flashes of this in A Link to the Past here and there, but here it is finally in full effect. Each dungeon is substantially smaller, but way more dense. In its simplest form, you'll trek through a dungeon encountering traps and puzzles that you can't solve, and then you'll find the item, and backtrack through it, now being able to solve everything you couldn't before, and then finally using the item to defeat the boss. Unfortunately, this means all of the boss's weak points are super obvious, and they're all pitifully easy in this game. Some of them are fun, but some are just kind of basic, and one of them is an absolute chore. I mentioned the boss is all talking, but this ugly ass genie will not shut up. This motherfucker will talk you to death before anything. Oh god, let me out of this fucking room! Anyway, this structure for dungeon and boss design would be carried on through the rest of the series. And what this means for Link's Awakening is that, even though there aren't any brand new items in this game, all of them are utilized to much more tremendous effect. The hookshot is a night and day improvement over its introductory game, being able to cross trap rooms, pull off monster helmets, unravel bridges, and overall just used to cross way more gaps in dungeons and caves. The shield can now be activated manually and completely defends Link from not just projectiles, but enemies themselves, turning him into a veritable dark nut. The flippers now let you dive underwater to dodge enemy attacks or find hidden underwater passages. The Pegasus boots can be used to shatter obstacles, catch teleporting enemies, and get a running start to jump across wide gaps using the game's only new item, the Roc's Feather. It lets Link jump, which of course is not new for the series, but it's new for the traditional overhead perspective. It adds a lot of versatile movement options, which is great for navigating around rooms as well as dodging enemies. The Ocarina returns, but with significantly greater importance. You don't get the Ocarina and immediately know how to play it. You have to actually learn different songs from certain characters, including Marin in another touching scene. Musical instruments in Zelda have never been of much importance until now, and as the series progresses, we are of course going to see them play pivotal roles in the stories. In Link's Awakening, one of the songs is used to warp, one opens the egg where the windfish sleeps, and another is used to raise the dead. As for the 3 staple items, they're all pretty crazy. The boomerang is not its normal self at all. Now it's a hidden late game item that completely decimates enemies. If you have the rooster, you can fly around with the boomerang hovering below you, destroying everything in its path. The bow is also a late game item, and in fact it's not technically needed to beat the game at all. The 3 instances where you quote need the bow can all be circumvented. But in any case, you can combine arrows and bombs to shoot bomb arrows, which is cool as hell. This is made possible due to having 2 item slots, meaning you can create a number of fun item combinations, like the feather and hookshot to fight these gomas, or the shield and bombs against this facade boss. Unfortunately though, this comes with some limitations, and again these are hardware things. The sword counts as an item, meaning to equip 2 items you can't have your sword out. But while traditional Zelda instinct may say you need the sword out at all times, it's not actually that true in this game. Plenty of items like the hookshot and boomerang and magic rod are fully capable of taking on enemies. The bigger problem is the power bracelet, which before has always been a passive item, but now is an active one. You need to equip the bracelet anytime you want to lift rocks or pull levers, because there's no context-sensitive actions in this game like there was in the last one. Except for talking, and playing the trendy game, and diving. Come to think of it, what the fuck was the problem with having the power bracelet be context-sensitive? If I'm pressing A in front of a rock, what the fuck do you think I'm wanting to do? Well, it wouldn't be that big a deal if there weren't so many rocks to lift up, but they're everywhere, halting your progress all over the overworld. It would be real nice if the rocks only needed to be lifted once, but nope, they respawn when you leave the screen. The reason that they are everywhere is because the overworld, like the dungeons, is structured completely differently. It's much more like Zelda 2, where each section is gated until you complete the current dungeon, except to a much greater degree. I definitely attribute this to being a handheld title, meaning you can play the game in short bursts and never get too far lost or wondering where you were going next. Just look for the obstacles that you can bypass with your most recent item, and if you don't know how to bypass an obstacle, just accidentally brush against it, and the game provides you with a fucking novel explaining that this is an obstacle you can't get past. This fucking game is annoyingly text heavy. Even if you have the item needed to get past something, you better not fucking touch that thing because the game will blast you with text. In the original version, you could cut the text short, but in the DX version, I guess they thought that was too nice a quality of life thing and removed it. Don't pick up the little power-ups of defense and offense because the game will explain what they do every single time and assault you with the most annoying-ass music. Don't pick up compasses in dungeons because the game wants to explain all of its new features every single time. Oh, and did I mention you won't be able to lift this rock with your bare hands? No, but I can break this fucking game cartridge with my bare hands. Getting around the overworld can be a bit of a pain because of this structure. Koholint is extremely dense, meaning every few screens you'll have to take out an item, and the warp system is absolute ass. You can only warp freely to one location, which is not in a very useful place generally speaking, or else you have to find dedicated warp points. Some of the inner dungeon side quests require a lot of traversal around the island, and it can get pretty tedious at times. Again, the architecture of Koholint, kinda suspicious. But exploring it is a bit more rewarding than the last game with the series debut of a collectible, these being the secret seashells. There's only 26, but the reward of finding 20 of them is fantastic, and these, combined with the 12 heart pieces, equals quite a bit more hidden secrets to find. A fun thing to note is that as you explore Koholint, Link fills in his map automatically, but in dungeons he does not, a complete reversal from the first game. Generally, the quests between dungeons are fairly robust compared to previous games, which is a nice improvement to pacing in my opinion. Even the missions that feel like filler are surprisingly enjoyable, like this ghost who starts following you around out of nowhere. At first I thought this was annoying and a cheap way to block you from entering the next dungeon right away, but now I think it's kind of funny. He wants you to take him to his old house just so he can get a nostalgia kick. I mean, I've visited old neighborhoods for the same reason, so it's kind of endearing in a way. But as is to be expected, there are a few aspects in Link's Awakening that are a step backward. The most noticeable is combat. While the controls are as smooth as ever and the Rockscape is great for maneuverability, the variety from A Link to the Past with the magic spells and all that is just not here. Magic is absent in this game, which is super disappointing. But more than that, your arsenal of items is not very combat friendly. In fact, unless you steal the bow, you won't get any long-range weapons until the hookshot, which is the second half of the game. And stealing the bow is pretty undesirable because then you'll be called thief for the rest of the game, in all caps, which might not matter to you, but to me, hearing Marin call me thief is pretty sad, and the Windfish calling me thief is straight up depressing. Like yeah, I showed up on this island, robbed its residents, and then destroyed it. Bitch. Let's check and see if Link's Awakening finally fixes the Zelda series' pervasive problem of locking you into a room with a boss that you don't have the means to kill. Initially I thought yes, it did, which is why in the first episode I said it would take 4 fucking games before the series fixes this problem. But nope, I was wrong. It took 5 fucking games. You can run out of bombs against the Stalfos in level 5, and you can run out of magic powder against the final boss. Time to get your shit together, Zelda series. All of the other steps backwards from the previous game are hardware issues that I've already talked about, such as the power bracelet thing and the poor sound quality. I would love to hear this soundtrack free from the 8-bit constraints of the Game Boy, which of course leads me to the upcoming Link's Awakening remake. As far as I'm concerned, this version has the potential to fix nearly all of these silly problems and propel Link's Awakening into the uppermost echelon of Zelda titles where it truly belongs. It shouldn't be a problem either. There's no way that they still make the power bracelet unequipable, and the music of course will be higher quality. The only thing that concerns me, and it's a big thing, is how will the game's tone translate? Link's Awakening is an 8-bit game, of course, which means that its world is more fully realized in our own minds rather than on the screen. Our imagination is what brings Koholint to life, and what we have with the upcoming version is essentially someone else's interpretation of it. When I first saw the trailer, I was super fucking disappointed. It doesn't look at all how I would have made it look, and it didn't fit the tone of the game from my initial impressions. But as I reflected on it, I came to the realization which I've just described, that no remake could ever possibly reimagine Link's Awakening as it exists in my mind. So I'm going to choose to remain optimistic, and while I still don't care for the art style, I'm definitely looking forward to this one. It's not like it's gonna ruin my childhood. Koholint will always be a real place in my heart, and Marin, the Windfish, the mysterious owl, and all the quirky characters will live on. Link's Awakening is truly one of the most special games ever made, and whether it's the original black and white release, the Color DX version, or the upcoming Switch version, everyone owes it to themselves to experience this absolutely marvelous little game and this mysterious and whimsical world. Even as it fades from existence, Koholint will live on, forever.